The city glittered beneath the night sky, 1,000 lights shimmering like fallen stars scattered across Manhattan. Elena Torres tugged lightly at the hem of her dress as she stepped out of the cab, tilting her head back to take in the towering penthouse that loomed above her. The glass walls reflected the glow of the street below, each window revealing glimpses of laughter, music, and wealth she rarely brushed shoulders with. She inhaled deeply, clutching the small purse in her hand, reminding herself this was just a party, a birthday party for her best friend. Nothing more. Inside, the penthouse was alive with sound and movement. Crystal chandeliers caught the light of golden candles placed artfully along the walls. Music pulsed faintly from hidden speakers, an elegant rhythm that set the mood for champagne glasses clinking and hushed conversations that carried the sharp edge of business deals disguised as small talk. Elena smoothed her hair back and took a steadying breath. Her dress was simple, a midnight blue that skimmed her figure without revealing too much. It wasn't flashy like the sequined gowns around her, but it was hers, chosen with care. She stepped into the current of the crowd, her smile polite but never forced, her eyes always searching for her best friend. People passed her like a tide, perfume heavy in the air, laughter just a touch too loud, the language of the elite woven in every nod and gesture. Elena, ever grounded, reminded herself she belonged here, if only because she was invited. She wasn't here to impress anyone, least of all the kind of men who wore their success like armor and their arrogance like a crown. Then she saw him. Adrian Blackwell. It took only a second for the name to sink into her awareness, whispered from her best friend countless times before. The older brother, the elusive one, the man who had built an empire from a angle-failing investment firm, turning it into a fortress of influence and wealth. The stories painted him as untouchable, cold, calculating, the kind of man who could stare down a boardroom of seasoned executives and not blink once. And there he was, standing with effortless authority near the balcony doors, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his posture relaxed but commanding. Elena froze where she stood, halfway through a polite greeting with someone whose name she'd already forgotten. The noise of the room faded around her, narrowed into silence as her eyes locked with his. It was not a gentle glance, not the fleeting acknowledgement of two strangers crossing paths. It was sharper, heavier, as if he had felt her gaze and turned deliberately to catch it. Adrian's expression gave nothing away. His face was carved in the stillness of a man who did not need to explain himself to anyone. Dark suit tailored with precision, tie knotted perfectly, every detail immaculate. His eyes, though, were another matter. There was steel in them, yes, but also a quiet weight that stirred something unfamiliar in her chest. Elena blinked first, her breath catching. She looked down, breaking the connection, trying to steady herself with a sip of champagne. It was ridiculous, she told herself. He was just her best friend's brother, a man far above her world, with no reason to notice her beyond curiosity. And yet, when she dared to glance back, he was still watching. Not openly, not rudely, but with a subtle intensity that unsettled her more than she cared to admit. The air between them carried something unspoken, something she wasn't ready to name. The party swirled around them, masks of charm and wealth worn by everyone else. But in that one silent exchange across the crowded room, Elena felt the first thread of something tugging at her life, something that would not let go, and she didn't know it yet. This night, this moment, was the beginning of everything. The music grew louder as the night settled deeper into the penthouse, and Elena moved through the crowd with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her best friend had already been swept away by a circle of well-wishers and admirers, leaving Elena to wander the gilded halls like a guest in a palace that wasn't hers. She paused near the long bar where glasses of champagne were lined like soldiers waiting for orders. The golden bubbles rose and fell as though mocking her steady nerves. She reached for one, telling herself she belonged, even if every glance from strangers felt like an unspoken test she might fail. Across the room, Adrian shifted his weight as though the air itself carried a secret only he could sense. He was surrounded by men in sleek suits and women draped in diamonds, but his attention was never on them. It was on her. Elena felt it again before she dared look up, the same invisible pull that had held her earlier. She lifted her glass slowly and risked a glance. His eyes caught hers instantly. This time she didn't look away. Her pulse quickened. He tilted his glass slightly, not a toast, not an invitation, but something in between. She swallowed hard. Her best friend had always warned her about Adrian. Ruthless in business, impossible to read, and dangerous when it came to hearts. He had never dated anyone without leaving whispers behind. Still, Elena felt a strange spark of curiosity. She told herself it was because he was a mystery, nothing more. She moved toward the balcony doors for some air, the weight of his gaze following like a shadow. The city outside shimmered with endless lights, but the quiet was broken when the door clicked behind her. Adrian stepped out, the sound of the party muffled as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them. She turned, startled but refusing to show it. He stood tall, the glow of the city casting sharp lines across his face. For a moment they said nothing, the silence alive with tension. Finally he spoke, his voice calm and low, the kind that carried weight without volume. "You don't seem like someone who enjoys these kinds of gatherings." She lifted her chin. "And you don't seem like someone who lets strangers talk to him alone." His mouth curved slightly, almost a smile. "Maybe I don't see you as a stranger." Her chest tightened. She wanted to laugh it off, but something in his tone wasn't casual. It was measured, like every word had been chosen with care. She took a sip of champagne to buy herself time. "If I don't belong here, why are you watching me instead of them?" she asked softly. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because they're all the same masks and games, but you walked in and disrupted the rhythm. People like that are hard to ignore." Elena's heart pounded against her ribs. She tried to answer, but the door burst open suddenly. Two guests stumbled out, giggling loudly, and brushed past them without noticing the storm between their eyes. Adrian straightened, his mask sliding back into place, and walked away without another word. Elena stood frozen, breathless, wondering what exactly she had just stepped into and why part of her wanted to step even deeper. The party roared on as if the night would never end, but Elena felt restless beneath the glittering lights. She wandered away from the laughter and the music into the quieter halls of the penthouse. The walls gleamed with polished wood and the floor reflected the faint glow of chandeliers above. She trailed her fingers along the wall as if steadying herself against the weight of a world that wasn't hers. Her heels clicked softly, the sound of a trespasser echoing in silence. She paused at a door half open, curiosity tugging at her like an invisible thread. Inside was a study lined with shelves and heavy curtains. It looked different from the rest of the penthouse, less polished, more private, as though the air itself carried the secrets of its owner. She stepped inside carefully, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The hum of the city slipped through the glass windows, muted and far away. She leaned against the edge of a desk scattered with papers and let out a breath. Finally, a corner untouched by pretense, the door slammed shut behind her with a metallic click. She spun around, startled, and tried the handle. It didn't budge. She twisted harder, then knocked, but the sound was swallowed by the music outside. Locked. A cold shiver ran through her. For a moment she thought about calling her best friend, but pride stopped her. She didn't want to look foolish over a jammed door. She sat on the arm of a leather chair, waiting for someone to notice. Minutes passed. Then the sound of footsteps approached. The handle turned once, then again. The door opened briefly, but shut hard behind the tall figure that entered. Adrian Blackwell. His sharp gaze met hers, surprise flickering across his otherwise steady face. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low, almost accusing. The door clicked again when he tried to open it, refusing to give way. His jaw tightened. "It seems we are both trapped." Elena swallowed hard. Of all the people she could have been locked in with, fate had chosen him. The man who unsettled her with a single look, the one her best friend had warned her about. She folded her arms, masking her nerves with defiance. "Maybe your house just doesn't like me." His lips curved slightly, though his eyes stayed sharp. "Or maybe it wanted us in the same room." The silence stretched. The air felt charged, heavy, as if the walls themselves waited for what would happen next. Adrian moved closer, his presence filling the space until Elena felt her breath catch. Every instinct told her to step back, to guard herself, but she stayed still. His eyes searched hers, dark and unreadable, and for the first time she realized this wasn't just a locked door. It was a moment neither of them had planned, a turning point carved out of coincidence and tension. The music outside faded into a distant hum. The city lights glowed like watchful stars. Two people who should never have been left alone were now bound by silence, by circumstance, and by something neither could yet name. And as the night stretched on, the study became less of a room and more of a cage, one that would test them both in ways they couldn't escape. The air in the study felt tighter with every passing minute, and Elena tried to distract herself by pacing from one side of the room to the other. The shelves full of leather-bound books seemed to stare back at her like silent witnesses. She glanced at Adrian, who leaned against the desk with unnerving calmness, scrolling through his phone as if being locked in a room with her was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. The contrast between his composure and her restless energy only fueled her frustration. "You really don't talk much, do you?" she finally said, breaking the silence. His eyes lifted from the screen, steady and unreadable. "I only speak when words are necessary." She tilted her head, amused, despite her nerves. "And what makes words necessary?" He slipped his phone into his pocket and walked toward her, the movement deliberate, the air thickening with tension. "When silence is no longer enough," he answered. Her heart thudded against her ribs. She wanted to laugh it off, to break the strange intensity that stretched between them, but something in his voice pinned her in place. She forced a smile and picked up a book from the shelf, flipping through the pages, though she wasn't reading a single word. He watched her closely, his gaze sharp as if measuring every reaction. "Why me?" she asked softly, not looking up. "You could focus on anyone at this party, and yet you looked at me like I had stepped onto your stage without permission." Adrian paused before replying, his tone quieter, almost thoughtful. "Because you're different. They chase attention. You resist it. They polish themselves to shine. You walk in with flaws visible, and somehow that makes you brighter." Elena blinked, surprised by the honesty behind his words. She set the book down carefully to hide the tremor in her hands. "That almost sounds like a compliment," she whispered. "Almost," he said, his lips curving, but his eyes darker than ever. The silence that followed was heavier than before, the kind of silence that hummed with possibility. Elena sat down on the armchair, gripping the edge as though anchoring herself. Adrian remained standing, his figure cast in shadows by the faint light from the city. She studied him quietly, and for the first time saw more than the ruthless businessman her friend always described. There was something guarded in him, something that looked like an old wound he didn't dare reveal. The suspense in the room thickened when the sound of the party outside faded further, as if the world beyond that locked door had disappeared. Elena's pulse raced, and her thoughts tangled with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. She opened her mouth to speak again, but stopped when Adrian crossed the last bit of distance between them and lowered his voice. "The truth is, people don't usually get this close to me. They don't last long when they do." Her breath caught at the confession, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. She leaned back against the chair, searching his face. "And what makes you think I won't last?" she asked, steadying her voice. His gaze held hers, unblinking as he said quietly, "Because I'm not sure if I want you to." The words hung in the air like a dangerous secret neither of them could take back. And in that instant, Elena realized this night was no longer just about a locked door. It was about what they might uncover in the shadows, and whether either of them was ready for the storm it promised to unleash. The minutes inside the study stretched into hours, and the night pressed against the tall glass windows like a restless tide. Elena sat with her knees drawn slightly together, her hands clenched tight against the fabric of her dress, as if the silence might otherwise consume her. Adrian leaned back against the desk, his arms crossed, his eyes unreadable, but she could feel the weight of his thoughts circling her like invisible smoke. She tried to steady her breathing and forced her voice to sound casual. "Do you always keep people locked away when you're tired of small talk?" He glanced at her sharply. "I didn't plan this, but maybe the house did." She raised an eyebrow, unsure whether he was joking or serious. His tone gave nothing away. He pushed himself off the desk and began pacing the room, the movements deliberate like a predator tracing the edges of its cage. The tension thickened when he stopped near the window. The city lights painted his reflection in fractured shards across the glass. Without looking at her, he spoke, his voice low. I used to trust easily. Too easily. She leaned forward, caught off guard by the sudden rawness in his words. What happened? He let out a dry laugh. I built something from nothing, and people came close because they wanted a piece of it, not me. Friends turned competitors, lovers turned liars. I learned to build walls higher than these towers. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to reply, but the heaviness in his voice kept her quiet. After a long pause, she whispered, You think everyone leaves because they want something. Maybe some people just want to stay. His eyes finally shifted from the glass to her face, and for a second the mask cracked. She saw not the cold millionaire, but a man haunted by betrayal. To break the heaviness, she let out a nervous laugh. My story's simpler. I was always the friend standing next to the prettier one, the side kick who didn't get noticed. I got used to it, but it never stopped stinging. That's why I talk too much and laugh too loud. It's armor. Adrian studied her intently, his gaze steady and sharp. You don't need armor, he said softly. Not with me. Her chest tightened at his words. Before she could answer, a loud thud shook the door handle. They both jumped, turning sharply. Someone had tried the door from outside, then left when it didn't open. The sound reminded them of their situation, locked away from the world together. Adrian exhaled slowly, but the unease in his eyes lingered. They won't notice until morning, he muttered. Elena's pulse raced. The idea of being trapped alone with him until sunrise both terrified and thrilled her. She tried to lean back to create space, but Adrian stepped closer as if drawn to her by a force neither of them could fight. The air narrowed until it was just his shadow falling across her, the quiet sound of her breath, the steady weight of his presence. If you're waiting for me to run, she said quietly, I won't. His lips curved, but his eyes held something darker than a smile. That's what I'm afraid of. The words slipped between them like a secret confession, and the suspense in the room swelled until even the silence seemed to tremble. For the first time, Elena realized that the danger here wasn't the locked door, but the man who had just begun to let her see the cracks in his armor, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to escape them. The night had grown heavier, and the silence inside the study felt like a second skin pressing against Elena's shoulders. She sat by the window staring at the endless maze of city lights, but her attention was on the man pacing behind her. Adrian's steps were slow and deliberate, as though he carried battles in his chest no one else could see. His presence filled every corner of the room, leaving no space for escape. When he finally stopped, he was closer than before, his voice low and rough. You don't understand what happens when people cross my lines, Elena. She turned to face him, steadying her breath. Then explain it. He hesitated, his eyes unreadable. Every person I let close has betrayed me. Every single one. And still she whispered, You keep watching me like you're daring me to prove you wrong. For the first time, his composure cracked. He leaned in, bracing one hand against the wall just above her shoulder. The move wasn't threatening, but it carried a force that made her pulse race. She could feel the heat of him, the restrained energy coiled in every muscle. Her throat tightened when his eyes dropped briefly to her lips before lifting back to her gaze. If this were a movie, she said softly, this would be the moment when the music swells and the characters forget the world outside. His lips curved faintly. And what happens after that? She swallowed. That depends on whether they choose to run or to stay. The tension between them tightened until it was almost unbearable. He lowered his head slowly, and for a breathless second his mouth hovered dangerously close to hers. The world outside ceased to exist. The hum of the city faded. The muffled music from the party vanished. There was only him, the sound of his breath mingling with hers and the wild drum of her heartbeat. Then he pulled back abruptly as though burned. His jaw clenched, his voice strained. I can't. You don't want to get tangled with me, Elena. People think I'm dangerous in business. They have no idea how dangerous I am to someone's heart. She stared at him, stunned but unflinching. Do you think running away will make the truth disappear? He turned sharply, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. This isn't supposed to happen. You're not supposed to matter. Her voice trembled, but she forced it steady. Then why do I? The question sliced through the air sharper than any blade. He didn't answer, not immediately. Instead, he gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles whitened. She stood from the window and walked toward him, each step echoing louder than the last. When she stopped beside him, she spoke softly. Maybe I'm the first one who isn't here to take anything from you. Maybe I'm just here. His breath caught, but he didn't look at her. He stayed frozen as though fighting a war inside himself. For a fleeting moment, she thought he might push her away again, but when his eyes finally met hers, they were filled with something raw and unguarded. The air between them shifted from tension to danger and then to possibility, all at once. The almost kiss still lingered like a shadow, a promise left unfinished. Elena's heart pounded with the terrifying knowledge that whatever happened next would change everything. And as the night stretched deeper, the locked room no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a test written only for the two of them. The hour dragged toward midnight and the weight of the silence grew unbearable. Elena sat on the armchair, her fingers tangled together as if holding herself in place, while Adrian stood near the window, his face half shadow, half city light. His reflection looked fractured in the glass, a man divided between what he showed and what he hid. She studied him quietly, knowing every minute revealed something more dangerous than the last. Finally, he broke the silence, his tone rough like gravel. You shouldn't be here, Elena. Not in this room, not in my world. She rose from the chair, her voice sharper than she intended. Then why haven't you opened that door? Why are you still standing here with me if you don't want me close? His jaw clenched, his hand flexing against the window frame. Because I don't know how to want without destroying. The words struck harder than any warning, and for a long moment she couldn't move. She walked toward him carefully until the space between them narrowed to inches. Maybe you're not the only one carrying scars, she said quietly. Maybe you just hide yours better. His eyes flicked to hers, and for once they weren't steel, they were fire. The storm broke in his voice when he spoke again. I was betrayed by the one person I swore would never turn on me, a friend who was closer than a brother. He sold me out for money and power, left me to bleed in a deal that nearly cost me everything. Since that night I stopped trusting, stopped believing anyone could stand beside me without stabbing me in the back. Elena's chest ached at the raw confession. She wanted to reach for him, but fear of breaking the fragile moment held her still. So that's why you hide behind silence, she whispered. That's why you build walls so high no one dares climb them. He gave a bitter laugh, low and unsteady. And yet here you are climbing anyway. Her heart pounded, but she refused to step back. Maybe I don't want to climb, she said. Maybe I want to stay inside the walls with you. The air between them trembled, heavy with tension and unspoken longing. Adrian's breath grew uneven, his control slipping piece by piece. He reached up slowly, his hand hovering near her cheek before he finally touched her skin. The warmth of his fingers seared her, the gentleness shocking in contrast to the storm in his words. Elena's breath hitched. If you're trying to scare me away, it isn't working. His eyes darkened, his thumb brushing lightly against her jaw. That's what terrifies me. Because for the first time in years, I don't want someone to leave. Her lips parted, but no words came. The city outside burned like 1,000 witnesses, yet the room felt like the only place in the world. And in that moment, with his hand against her skin and his heart laid bare, she realized the danger wasn't in being trapped with him. The danger was in how much she already wanted to stay. The night stretched deeper until the city outside seemed to blur into silence. The party had long since dulled, but in the locked study time felt suspended. Elena sat on the edge of the armchair, her pulse quick with anticipation, while Adrian remained by the desk, his eyes fixed on her with a weight that made the air harder to breathe. Something unspoken lingered between them, something neither dared to name, but both could feel pressing closer with every minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the tension. You keep looking at me like you see something I don't want you to see. She swallowed her nerves and lifted her chin. Maybe I do. Maybe I see the man who's tired of pretending nothing can touch him. Adrian moved slowly across the room, each step deliberate until he stood before her. His presence was overwhelming, the scent of his cologne mixed with the electricity of the moment. He leaned closer, his eyes locked on hers. "You're reckless, Elena. People like me don't get saved. People like me don't deserve it." Her breath caught, but she refused to flinch. "Maybe it isn't about what you deserve. Maybe it's about what you need." The silence that followed was thick with suspense, and the air between them trembled as if waiting for something to break. He raised his hand, hesitating before brushing a strand of her hair back behind her ear. His touch lingered warm and careful in a way that contradicted the harsh words he had spoken moments earlier. The walls he had spent years building felt as though they were crumbling brick by brick in her presence. Adrian's jaw tightened, his eyes dark with conflict. "I told myself I would never risk this again, never give anyone the power to undo me. Yet here you are, undoing me piece by piece." His voice faltered like the admission had been torn from a place he'd buried too deep. Elena's chest tightened at, the confession. She wanted to answer, but her throat betrayed her with silence. Instead, she reached for his hand, her fingers tentative yet steady as they closed around his. The contact jolted him, his breath stilled and his eyes locked on hers with a mixture of longing and fear. The suspense in the room swelled until every heartbeat sounded like a drum. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes as though torn between desire and restraint. Finally, in a whisper so low she barely heard it, he breathed words that shattered every wall he had left. "Don't leave me." The power of it shook her more than any declaration of love could have. It was raw, it was desperate, it was the truth of a man who had lived too long behind iron defenses. She squeezed his hand gently, her own voice trembling. "Then don't push me away." For a moment the room fell into absolute silence, broken only by the sound of their uneven breaths. And then he leaned in, closing the last inches between them, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that carried every ounce of fear, longing, and surrender he had tried to bury. It was not the kiss of a man in control, but of one finally letting go. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers, his eyes closed as if the world beyond the locked door no longer mattered. And in that fragile space, Elena realized the night had changed everything. This was no longer about being trapped. This was about two hearts daring to collide, knowing the impact might break them both. The first pale light of dawn crept through the tall windows, spilling across the study like an uninvited witness. Elena stirred awake on the armchair, her body curled beneath Adrian's jacket. For a heartbeat, she forgot where she was until the memories of the night before came rushing back. The whispered words, the trembling kiss, the weight of his forehead resting against hers. She sat up quickly, her chest tightening with both fear and exhilaration. Adrian was already awake, standing near the desk, his back to her as he poured himself a glass of water. He looked composed again, the mask of control carefully restored, but his shoulders betrayed a tension that hadn't been there before. She rose quietly and crossed the room. "Morning," she said, her voice softer than she intended. His reply came without turning. "Morning." The lock clicked suddenly. The door opened as if it had never been broken, and a servant poked his head inside. "Sorry, sir, the lock jammed last night. It should be fine now." The man left quickly, leaving the two of them frozen in silence. Freedom was only a step away, yet neither of them moved. Adrian set the glass down and finally faced her, his expression unreadable. "You should get back to the party," he said quietly. "It ended hours ago," she replied, her tone sharper. "What are you really saying?" He closed the distance between them slowly, his eyes searching hers with the same intensity that had haunted her all night. "I'm saying last night shouldn't have happened." Her stomach dropped. So it meant nothing. His jaw clenched. It meant everything. That's why it can't happen again. Her pulse raced as she stepped closer, refusing to let him retreat into his walls. "You whisper, 'Don't leave me,' and now you're telling me to forget it." "Which is the lie, Adrian?" His hand tightened into a fist at his side. None of it was a lie. That's the problem. The suspense between them thickened until the air itself felt electric. She wanted to demand the truth, but his phone buzzed on the desk, cutting through the moment. He glanced at the screen and his face hardened. An urgent message. Something about a betrayal in his company. His expression darkened with the same shadow she had seen in his confession. He picked up his jacket and slipped into the cold armor of the businessman once more. "I have to go," he said. She grabbed his wrist before he could step past her. "You can keep running from me, but you can't run from what you feel." He looked down at her hand, then at her face torn between two worlds. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Not of danger, not of failure, but of her, because she was the only one who could undo him. He pulled free gently and whispered, almost broken, "Don't wait for me, Elena." And then he walked out, leaving the door wide open behind him. Elena stood alone, her chest heaving, the silence of the study echoing louder than the music from the night before. She had stepped into the wrong room hours ago and found herself in the center of something far greater than she could have imagined. Now she had to decide whether to follow the man who wanted her, yet feared her, or let him slip back into the shadows he had lived in too long. The choice was no longer fate's. It was hers. The city buzzed with its usual rhythm, but for Elena the world felt strangely hollow after that night. She returned to her small apartment carrying the weight of his words in her chest. "Don't wait for me." Yet every morning she caught herself thinking of him. Every evening she replayed the memory of his whisper, "Don't leave me," as if her heart refused to obey his command. She tried to bury herself in work and laughter with friends, but no distraction dulled the echo of what they had shared. Meanwhile, Adrian buried himself in a different kind of silence. His days were consumed with meetings and firestorms inside his company. Whispers of betrayal surfaced again from his board, a reminder of the wounds that had shaped him. Yet even as he fought through spreadsheets and boardroom battles, his mind betrayed him with flashes of Elena's smile, her stubborn defiance, her hand gripping his wrist when he tried to walk away. He told himself he had chosen the safe path. Yet every night his apartment felt emptier, darker, colder. One evening, weeks later, Elena received an unexpected message from her best friend. "A gala is happening at the Carter Hotel. Adrian will be there. Come with me." Elena almost said no, but her heart overruled her reason. She dressed simply in a gown of deep emerald green, its fabric flowing like quiet fire. As she stepped into the grand ballroom filled with glittering lights and polished laughter, her eyes searched instinctively until they found him. Adrian stood near the center, commanding the room in his sharp black suit, his expression carved from steel. But when he saw her, the mask cracked. For a moment his gaze faltered and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. She moved through the crowd, each step deliberate, though her heart thundered. He turned as she approached, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made everything else blur. When she stopped before him, silence swallowed the noise around them. "You said not to wait," she whispered, "but I didn't listen." His jaw tightened, his voice low. "I told myself pushing you away would protect you, but I was wrong. The real danger was losing you." The confession broke through his armor, and for the first time he looked stripped of every mask. His hand found hers in the middle of the ballroom, and he held it like an anchor. "Last night in that study I told you people never stay. But you stayed. You broke Eve, a wall I built. And when I said don't leave me, I meant it with everything I am." Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Then stop running, Adrian. Stop hiding behind fear. Let yourself be human. Let yourself be mine." The guests around them whispered, but neither cared. Adrian drew her closer, his voice steady but trembling with emotion. "From the moment you walked into my world, nothing has been the same, and I don't want it to ever be the same again. Stay with me, Elena. Not as a mistake, not as a secret. Stay as the one thing I can't let go." Her answer came not in words, but in the way she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was fierce, desperate, and undeniable. The ballroom erupted in shock, but the only sound that mattered was the quiet surrender of two hearts colliding. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers, whispering the words she had once heard in the dark, but now spoken in light. "Don't leave me." She smiled through her tears. "I'm not going anywhere." The night ended not with walls, but with freedom. A man who had feared love had finally embraced it, and a woman who had been overlooked her whole life became the center of someone's world. Their story had begun in silence behind a locked door, but it was in the open, with every eye watching, that they chose each other. And this time it was not fate or circumstance that bound them. It was love, raw, imperfect, and powerful enough to rewrite everything they once believed impossible.